All right, well, good afternoon, and it gives me great pleasure. I'm Cal Dooley. I'm President and CEO of the American Chemistry Council. And we're now kind of at a point where we're transitioning in this forum. This morning we heard a lot of expert speakers that were talking about how do we fully develop our energy sources, whether it's coal, whether it's natural gas, whether it's alternatives and renewables. And now we're moving into, how can the customers, the manufacturers and consumers, how can we transform that energy source or feedstock into products and activities that can generate economic opportunities for a lot of people who are struggling to find jobs? If there is any upside to the recession that we've experienced and the slow economic recovery, is that more and more Americans, and I think certainly more and more Ohioans, are recognizing that we do have to make things in the United States. There's a growing public acceptance that we do have to have a restoration of manufacturing in the United States. And what we talked about tomorrow is if you want to have sustained economic growth, if you want to see increased manufacturing in the United States, it has to be built upon a foundation of a sound domestic energy policy. And it is an energy policy that's built on all of the above, as we discussed this morning. And what we look at is terms of the tremendous opportunity to see a renaissance in manufacturing that would be built upon that energy policy is exciting. As I said, I represent the chemical industry. And we are now poised, I think, to enter into a golden age in chemical manufacturing. And the reason for that is because of the tremendous new supplies that we have available to us in natural gas that are predominantly in the shale formations. And Ohio is uniquely positioned to capitalize on those. Our council, the American Chemistry Council, did an economic analysis just a few months ago in terms of what would it mean to U.S. chemical manufacturers if we saw an increase in 25% of ethane production, natural gas production in the United States. Our calculation was it would result in a minimum of $16 billion in capital investments over the next 5 to 10 years that would generate over 400,000 additional jobs in this country and generate $132 billion in additional GDP contributions from our industry. And why is that the case? Is because we are going to see, because of natural gas and competitively priced natural gas, the United States chemical industry moving from what was a high-cost producer just 5 years ago, when we saw in the last decade, when we saw our industry lose about 140,000 jobs, when we were a higher cost producer than even Western Europe in chemical manufacturing, that now because of natural gas and shale gas, we have now moved down the cost curve that we are one of the lowest cost producers of chemicals, and that's what gives us a great opportunity. We've also did some further analysis in terms of what would it mean to the state of Ohio if you were chosen to be the location of one of the of a cracker that would be built in the United States. Is that we calculated that a cracker is about $1.5 to $2 billion capital investment. You look at the related industries that would be a part of that, it's about $3.2 billion in capital investment that would result from the location of a cracker. What does that mean? It means almost about $1.6 billion in additional contribution to the economy just from that cracker. And if you look at what would be the annual output in terms of generation of revenue, it's almost $8 billion annually. 16,000 jobs that will result from that investment in that location of a cracker. So the stakes are high here, and the opportunities are tremendous. And the challenge we have is how do we ensure that the private sector and the government sector is coming together to make sure that we have the regulatory policies that allow us to maximize the development of natural gas, as well as the investment in manufacturing capacity, and to ensure also that the private sector is developing the infrastructure that allows us to capitalize on this tremendous opportunity. And we have an excellent panel here today that is going to really provide us with insights in terms of how they are responding today on this opportunity. And you have the list of all of our participants up there, so I don't need to go in to introduce them individually. But the first is Ann Bomar, who is the Senior VP and General Manager for Dominion East, Ohio. Now, the governor, when he gave his opening remarks today, made it very clear that he wants Ohioans to benefit from the jobs and the investment. Now, Dominion might have violated that objective a little bit because they've already invested $500 million in a natural gas separator in the foreign territory of West Virginia. But they do have an opportunity to redeem themselves, and Ann is going to, indicate how they're doing that with their investments in a pipeline distribution network in the state of Ohio. Ann?
Thanks, Cal. I do want to take this opportunity to thank the governor and his team and the whole organizers of the forum. This is tremendous, and I hope that the exchange of ideas will begin here but continue as we go through the implementation of the infrastructure that leads to some of that economic growth that you were talking about. The evolution of this shale play has indeed been rapid, and there's a lot that we're working through to figure out, but there's a lot to build on here, and that's somewhat where a company like East Ohio, Dominion East Ohio, is a bit of a bridge between some of the production development that we've heard about and we'll hear some more about through the day, and we are part of how that gas gets from the production investments that are being made to the manufacturers, consumers, market here in Ohio and elsewhere. We do have a long history. Jerry James referred to the strong history of production here in Ohio. East Ohio, a creature of Standard Oil, here since 1898, built major systems to move Appalachian gas production into the northern Ohio steel mills. That same capacity lies right in the heart of the area where the Utica and Marcellus shales being developed today. Cal referred to processing development initially aimed towards Marcellus, and as the production has evolved towards the west, we're standing ready and working with parties to make investments to grow into that. It's a question of building that market and getting those commitments in place to build that infrastructure. We've grown along with the industries over the decades and with the local gas production. As a result, we have a legacy of significant gas pipeline infrastructure in the ground that can be adapted, leveraged, expanded, grown into the needs of the production as it's taking shape here, which gives us a head start, but we know there's more investment that will need to be made. To put it in some context, we're a natural gas distribution company serving 1.2 million customers. That has to be our core responsibility. We have 20,000 miles of distribution line to do that. But we also have 1,400 miles of transmission line, 1,200 miles of gathering line, 60 billion cubic feet of underground storage, sort of beyond your typical gas distribution infrastructure. So that gives us some integrated capability to help serve the producers and their customers as they try to bring this product to market. We do have a long, proud tradition working with the Ohio Oil and Gas Association. Heard from Jerry earlier about some of their efforts to grow here in the state. We have an innovative cooperative relationship with the association based on their input and the cooperation among stakeholders that would maybe not normally be working together. We've invested about $50 million, increased their local production so that now something north of 25% of our area is served, our customers are served from local Ohio producing supply. So we have the capability to bring that directly to our customers. The dry gas that was described in the previous panel is put into our pipelines and delivered to customers today. We also have a significant additional market that could absorb some of the growing supply needs here. But predominantly what we're focused on is becoming the pathway to processing. And Dominion is investing in processing just across the Ohio River. As I say, sort of in the heart of some of the existing infrastructure. It was a good place to start. It's in the heart of Dominion's connections to barge, rail, pipeline, trucking, other transportation for those processed byproducts, the ethane, propane, butane listing that was described, the value that's driving a lot of the wet gas stream production. As was mentioned, though, there's, I think, a critical mass of potential for drilling here in Ohio that's going to drive the need to construct that additional processing capacity here. So Dominion and others excited to be a part of those investments. working with parties now to try to secure those commitments and get those investments underway. Striking that balance as we prove up the prospects of the gas production and get the investments made with sufficient lead time so that that capacity is there when our customers need it. So we're striking that balance, trying to be ahead of the curve. Our existing infrastructure gives us a wonderful lever, a great head start that we will grow, that others will tap into. There are quite a few companies working alongside the likes of Dominion, a couple of dozen producing companies investigating the prospects and working on those investments now. So the groundwork's being laid, and I think that the short answer to getting this production moved into markets is to leverage the infrastructure that we have, build into that in a smart way. We have the tools that we need to do that with some of the legislation that was referred to. Gives us the freedom to handle gathering investments on a market-type basis and bring those competitive forces to bear, which is exciting.
Well, thank you, Ann. I think what the basic message here is, again, Ohio is uniquely positioned that you do have an infrastructure to deliver this, and the pathway to processing, I think, was just a terrific way to describe it.
That's us.
We're now going to move on to Mark Dangler, who's president of the business unit leader at BP Husky. BP Husky and Mark has made a major initiative to capitalize on the Canadian oil sands development in the refinery. Now you have the opportunity to capitalize potentially on some of the oils that might be generated by the Utica Shale development. Does Ohio have the refinery capacity? Does that pose unique challenges to you, or does this diversity of access to energy resources just another opportunity and a unique attribute that Ohio has?
Well, I think it is definitely a unique opportunity, and the shareholders of my company own 2 of the 4 refineries in Ohio, as well as are both active in the development of oil sands in Canada. And so as a refiner, I don't see any conflict between the development of the Utica oil as well as oil sands from Canada. And just to put in perspective, I think one of the lead questions in the brochure was, are oil sands a long-term and reliable source of supply? And to put it in perspective, I know it's really early days around the volume of recoverable oil in Utica, but I've heard numbers of the 5 to 10 billion barrels, which is a huge amount of oil. It kind of puts it similar size to Prudhoe Bay and those types of fields that have been developed in the U.S. In Canada, the oil sands, the recoverable oils are currently estimated at 170 billion barrels. So it's a huge resource, and one that will be developed by Canada. Its natural home is here in the U.S. and in North America. And so, but I don't see a conflict, and I'll elaborate why. First of all, crude oil in its natural state really is not a usable product. It must be refined to convert it into usable products such as transport fuels, chemical feedstocks, lubricants, and those types of products, heating oil. Currently, fossil fuels, so oil, gas, and coal, produce or deliver 80% of the globe's energy, the global demand for energy. While some of the other technologies we've heard about today are going to grow at a rapid pace, the reality is to keep up with the 40% demand in global energy that's expected to be required over the next 20 years. On an absolute basis, fossil fuels will actually be required at a higher level than they even are today. And that's with rapid growth in alternative forms of energy. So the refining of crude oil, that industry will be around for decades to come. Let me bring it a little bit closer to home here. So in the U.S., we produce currently about 7.5 million barrels a day of crude oil. However, we consume 19 million barrels a day of crude oil. So therefore, we're importing in the United States 11 million barrels a day of crude oil. Less than 4 million of that comes from Canada and Mexico. So we are importing over 7 million barrels a day of oil from outside of North America. So that's why I say I think both shale oil development as well as oil sands has a place to kind of fill a void and get us back to being energy dependent in the United States. Specifically, here in Ohio, we do have 4 kind of large fuel refineries that do convert crude oil. 3 of those are more in the western part of the state, so 2 up in the Toledo area, 1 in Lima, and 1 in Canton, with a combined capacity of about over 500,000 barrels a day of production capacity. Almost all of that oil currently is sourced from outside of Ohio. So we could look to kind of move the oil that is developed within Ohio to the refineries. From a logistics perspective, there aren't a lot, as Mr. Heminger said earlier, most of the, we source crude from 3 locations predominantly, either the Gulf Coast, and this is all via pipeline, or the Mid-Continent region, or down from Canada. Oil flows predominantly from west to east, and as he indicated, we're kind of the end of the line from the pipeline's perspective. To move oil from the eastern part of Ohio to the 3 refineries on the western part of the state will require, some infrastructure to actually move the oil in the opposite direction. From a conflict perspective, actually having multiple sources of crude is a great thing for a refinery. Having a diversity of feedstock supply is fantastic because every crude is actually different. Crude oil isn't crude oil. Every field produces a different type of crude oil. So crude oil varies in its quality in whether it's light or heavy, and that's essentially an indication of how much naturally occurring transportation fuels does it have in it versus how much is too heavy to fit into transport fuels and has to be upgraded and cracked into more valuable products. So how much contaminants does it have? You may hear the term, sweet and sour. That's predominantly attributable to how much sulfur is in the crude, but there are other contaminants as well. And then crudes have a varying amount of acidity and or lack thereof, and that requires different refining capability to process it. So every refinery is different, and our volume planners at all time, and almost no refinery actually runs 100% of one type of crude. So we're always trying to maximize the use of our assets in each refinery by optimizing the blend of the crudes that we buy, from mixing light sweets to heavy crudes and to ultimately fully utilize our assets to make them as commercially viable as possible. So having diversity of feedstock supply is a great thing. Having a local supply of crude will clearly be beneficial in that the resupply time will be a lot shorter than bringing it all the way down from Alberta or other locations. And obviously the working capital that then is tied up with transporting things great distances, thousands of miles versus hundreds of miles, will be a benefit to the local refineries and make us more competitive. Off the crude side, on the gas side, refining of crude is a very kind of energy-intensive process. So we consume a lot of power, and we consume a lot of natural gas in the process of doing that. And so having a reliable source of power and a reasonably priced source of power and natural gas is really important to make refineries efficient and viable. And so all of these developments, I think, are great for the refining industry in Ohio.
Well, terrific, Mark. Thank you for those comments. Now we have the opportunity to move to 2 leaders in the U.S. chemical industry. We're first going to go to Craig Morrison, who is the Chair, President, and CEO of Columbus-based Momentum Performance Materials. And Momentum is the #1 producer of resin-coated proppants. And for those of you who don't know what that is that's one of the actual chemical ingredients that go into the fracking fluids and creates a kind of a honeycomb that allow you to extract the natural gas. So Momentum is the leading producer of that. And Craig, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about that and discuss the impact that you have seen in other state economies that have found shale reserves, and how did it impact your operations? Did it result in additional investments, and what are the larger ramifications did you see in those states that had that resource?
Yeah, I think we're in every major shale formation as far as providing product in the U.S., so we have a very broad observation in terms of the economic impact. And without exception, where they have found shale reserves, it's been tremendous growth. And I think earlier they talked about the Eagle Ford as one example in Texas, which is not of the same size and scale as Marcellus or potentially Utica if it reaches full potential. But when they did a study in Texas on the impact of that one reserve area, they found 60,000 jobs and $21 billion in economic impact to the state annually, and $1.2 billion in tax revenue to the state. So it gives you the order of magnitude of one of those reserves and what they can produce. Now, the reason Texas does so well is it has 4 to 5 major reserves in the state, and they have a very well thought out policy as a state on how to leverage that economically, which hopefully we in Ohio will do as well. I think there's also a counterbalance when you don't have access to natural gas, because one of the raw materials we use in our products, and we have 104 chemical plants in 37 countries, is methanol, which is natural gas based. If you went back to the 1990s, you would have had about 15 methanol plants in the United States producing product. By the mid-2000s, there were 0. And the reason is we could no longer source natural gas cost competitively. So it shows you the ramifications of either doing it well or not doing it well, and what can happen on a positive and a negative side. In terms of our company, in the proppant area, which is the highest growth business we have over the last decade, our business has grown 22% a year, year in and year out. And we've been opening up 1 new plant a year. And so mostly those have been west of the Mississippi, because that's where the older reserves were that we knew about. And now as we look at Ohio, as we look at east of the Mississippi and the reserves, we like to co-locate with where our customers are, because they have a need, to close proximity, fast access to the product. So it definitely has an impact where we find the reserves, where we put our plants. One plant, for instance, in Brady, Texas, that services the Eagleford, to give you an idea of a little microcosm of the impact, has 9,000 truckload shipments a year coming in and going out. So when you think about feeding, when you think about repairing trucks, when you think about lodging, we're a small, small fraction of the service in the oil and natural gas world, and we alone have 9,000 trucks going out of one of our plants. And that doesn't count the workers, that doesn't count everything else. So the impact economically is huge. And again, we have no doubt that we'll be able to develop here, along with all the participants from the previous panel.
Well, thank you, Craig. Now, turning to Greg Babe, who's the president and CEO of Bayer Corporation and Bayer Material Sciences. Greg, there's obviously Bayer's been very public about their, the opportunities that natural gas and the shale plays provide to Bayer and the chemical industry as a whole. There's publicly, people are aware that you've been trying to attract a partner in West Virginia. You can maybe talk a little bit about that, but I think what obviously the governor's team here is also going to be interested in is what is, the whole natural gas, whether it be Marcellus or Utica, what would that mean to Bayer's increased manufacturing commitment and investment in the state of Ohio?
Thank you. I certainly Bayer and I personally have been an outspoken advocate for this manufacturing renaissance. And I think that we really are at a very critical crossroads in the U.S. As Cal already said, and as we've heard many times, manufacturing has led us back from as far back as we've come from the recession, and there is much more opportunity there. First, I'd like to talk a bit about why the opportunity, in my personal opinion. We have 2 key advantages over the rest of the world that I think we often forget about. Number one, we are the most productive country in the world, bar none. We have the most productive workforce, and that productivity is critically important for a manufacturing renaissance. The other thing that we have as a key advantage is that we have the best university network in the world, bar none. And we're sitting here at The Ohio State University, certainly as a great institution that's part of that. And what that means is, despite what I think we may hear from rumors all around the world, we are still the most innovative country in the world as well. So we're innovative, and we have the highest productivity. One thing that we have lacked, and certainly in the industry that I've spent most of my career in, and Cal mentioned the statistics, Since the mid-2000s, we've lost 140,000 jobs in the chemical industry, and that is attributed primarily to the cost of energy, and specifically into natural gas, because it is an energy source as well as a raw material for us. So now we have this third component. With the discovery and the development of shale gas opportunities like Marcellus and like Utica, we now have the possibility of having globally competitive energy as well. I think when you put those three together, that we have a great opportunity to see this manufacturing renaissance that you've heard so many times today, and I think that certainly my company and I have continued to talk about. So, give us some examples. I think what we've seen from, despite what's going on directly in this industry, which has been the success story in the last couple of years, I think we're seeing a return to the U.S. Some of the announcements by great companies like General Motors and General Electric and DuPont, and the investments that they're making in their manufacturing base here in the United States. We must have that in order for the chemical industry to grow. Some of this we can do through export, but by and large, the loss of the 140,000 jobs in chemicals came not because of the loss of export, but because we lost the manufacturing base where those chemicals flow. 96% of everything that we use today is touched by the chemical industry. When that's manufactured elsewhere in the globe, we don't need the chemical industry at the same level any longer. So that's what's really at play here. Let's talk specifically and bring it down to, and I certainly am going to have to come back to the West Virginia issue and explain that a bit, Cal. But let's talk specifically what's in it for Ohio. We've heard about the natural gas liquids and the ethane and the propane and the butane, and certainly from a Marcellus perspective, much of the noise and the excitement is around the ethane and the cracker and ethylene cracker and where that would flow. And where that would flow would be to compounding facilities like the one that we have that sits in Newark, Ohio. We do all of our plastics compounding for North America in Newark, Ohio. We provide high-quality plastics for the automotive industry, for the security industry, for the medical industry, for medical devices, for housewares, for appliances. That is compounded in Newark, Ohio. As we see more of that returning, as we see growth in our manufacturing, that means that there's going to be more compounding capacity. There are going to be more jobs in Ohio as well, directly from that particular area. We happen to have two large underutilized sites in the state of West Virginia that we have marketed with infrastructure that is required to support an ethane cracker, infrastructure like environmental waste treatment facilities and steam plants and electrical distribution and all of those things that you need. Whether a cracker is built in West Virginia or in Pennsylvania or in Ohio, all certainly in discussions at this point in time, I think the overflow is really into this region. The growth in the compounding, the growth in the processing, the injection molders. By the way, most of them are in the Northeast now anyway. So we're closest to the market. So the opportunities go beyond the cracker. They certainly include the cracker, but they go well beyond the cracker. And they go into the downstream processing and into the injection molders and eventually into automotive and into appliance and into construction and all of those areas that we know will eventually rebound. So, from our view, we think this is a great opportunity to once again to drive this manufacturing renaissance and to do it based on those three advantages that we must leverage, and those are once again the highest productivity in the world, the best innovation in the world, and now a competitively priced energy source.
Great. You know what, Greg, you bring up, I think, an interesting question in terms of, if you're looking at, if Ohio and the governor's team is looking at, making it even more attractive for investment in, compounding, facilities or activities in Ohio. What is it, that they need to accentuate? I mean, what drives the decisions by a company? Whether it's infrastructure, delivery, refinery, or manufacturer. I mean, is it access to a customer base? Is it infrastructure, waterways, railways, workforce, qualified workforce? Is it incentives that a state provides? What drives that decision? Greg or Craig or Mark, anyone?
Well, I'll take a shot, and I'll just focus on one aspect. I think there are many. Incentives are always nice, so let's not act like they aren't. They're interesting for everyone. But I think it's clearly infrastructure is absolutely required. Proximity to the customer is very important. But what I'd like to focus on primarily, because I think it's really the make or break for us, is a qualified, skilled workforce. In our company, we've worked for 16 years with what we call our Making Science Make Sense program. We have over 1,000 employee volunteers who go into the local school districts to teach and demonstrate to teachers how to successfully teach science. Because we lose those students who may have an interest in science at about age 11, so we have to do a very good job of reaching them early and then keeping them interested. And whether we're talking about college graduates or operators, I heard it earlier in the panel today, STEM background is very important. And so I think a make or break for many decisions about location, others important, but a qualified workforce is critically important.
Greg?
Yeah, I think, we're actually right now expanding 2 plants in Ohio. And I've got to give the governor and the EPA, state EPA organization, a lot of credit, because we have a noticeable difference in the attitude, the cooperativeness, still holding us very much accountable for what we deliver and how we deliver it in terms of performance environmentally. But for us, you almost have to segment the industry and understand the drivers. Those particular plants service the world globally for electronics. If you look at this industry, oil and natural gas, if we co-locate a plant here for proppants, it will be because there are shale reserves here. We're close to the customer. But I think it comes back to, do you have incentives? Do you have an educated workforce, which I think Ohio does? And do you have a regulatory environment that holds you accountable, but also wants to be a partner with you, wants to work with you? So we find it a good environment, but I think if I was the governor, if I was the staff, I would actually segment the industry, because you can be very competitive in some, and realistically, you can spend an awful lot of time in others, and they're not going to come here for reasons you can't control.
Mark, did you want to add anything on that?
Well, clearly in addition to the labor force and demand and product, our feedstock supply and low-cost energy, I think for us we would, want to have a very clear and consistent kind of regulatory environment that we not only understand today, but understand, these investments are enormous investments that will kind of have a return over decades. And if you really can't have a good view of what the future holds, it really becomes difficult to place that big a bet into an uncertain market. So kind of a clear and consistent set of regulatory environment, competitive tax structure, and a streamlined permitting process. And we are very appreciative that Governor Kasich's administration, we feel is aligned with us in these areas and is moving us forward in that direction. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, and it sounds like some of the other panelists have said Ohio's doing some things right. I don't know if you would concur with that, but are there some things that there's still room for improvement? Or?
I do think we have a very constructive environment, and as has been discussed, the legislative background that lets us pursue some of these infrastructure builds outside the jurisdictional sort of traditional role of a distribution company is very important. I'd echo the calls for clarity on the regulatory policy and the consistency of that for these long-term investments that'll be here. In practical terms, that may translate into communicating these policy decisions effectively through and across the agencies so that there's a common purpose, and the investment that takes is it takes some resources to work through what that means in practical terms for the agencies and the folks that are engaged with us in reviewing our applications and seeing that we are held to the requirements that we reach. One of the things we've been able to do in some circumstances is bring resources to the table, very independent, but the applicant has some service needs that if we can bring the resources, it's well worth that cost to us and offer that up to the agencies and folks who are trying to implement those rules. So those types of flexibilities and this kind of dialogue, I think, is just going to improve things.
Do any of you, I think what we're seeing, across many of the areas that are now seeing the production of natural gas from shale formations is that there are some public concerns that are emerging in terms of how do we protect our drinking water, or how do we respond to some of the environmental air issues and emission issues. Do you think that we're effectively responding those, or is there something more that you think we ought to do? Because obviously, any of us who are vested with maximizing the production of energy resources, shale gas or whatever, you have to have the public confidence that we're doing it right, doing it appropriately, doing it safely. What kind of grade would you give the industry at this point? Ann?
I'd give us an A.
All right.
There's obviously always communication, and I think it's been mentioned through the day that in some arenas we can always do more. It's a complicated industry and easy to toss up potential fears that are then maybe more complicated to address. Certainly for a company like ours, making use of existing infrastructure is an environmental success story. We can put back to work some of the facilities that have already been constructed, reduce some of the environmental aspects of the construction that would otherwise be needed. But I do think that, fortunately, some of the benefits of the product that we're going for here, sell themselves, and I think that makes our story pretty easy.
Now, Mark, you're kind of involved with the oil sands coming down from Canada. There's been some, certainly in the environmental community, some concerns issued about that. Now you also might be accessing, liquids from the shale plays, which there's some environmental concerns about that. What kind of grade would you give us in terms of responding to those, and are there things we ought to be doing better there?
Well, first, I can speak best to the refining business, and I would say I'd agree from an A perspective that
we're all overachievers.
Over the last 10 to 15 years, we've actually reduced regulated emissions from our refinery by between 80 and 90%. I mean, it's a significant reduction, and so I think we have responded to the call to action, so to speak, to be more kind of environmentally conscious, and I'm not an expert in the upstream, but I do believe that the shareholders of my company feel that these resources can be developed in a very environmentally friendly way, and I think that has been demonstrated so far.
Cal, if I could add something. We're very big into wind energy. We're the largest producer of composites for the blades. We're also into solar. Those are a very small percentage of the energy produced in the world, low single digits. And if you listen to those that criticize, they have a good reason why you don't want to use coal. They have a good reason why you don't want to do natural gas fracking and drilling. They have a good reason why you don't want to use oil, and they have a good reason why nuclear is dangerous. Well, at some point, yes, you have to do these responsibly, and we do them responsibly, but you've got to provide energy for the world, and natural gas and oil is a major substance and product for that. And so, yes, we have to be focused on doing it right, but the world needs it, we need it in Ohio, and if we don't do it, it's going somewhere else. It's going to be produced in the Middle East or elsewhere. So that's our choice. Mother Nature gave us a great gift. We either play the hand or we fold it.
Greg?
Well, coming back to your question of the what are we doing right? I grew up on my grandfather's 150-acre dairy farm in the hills of West Virginia, which is right now dead in the middle of the shale gas development, of the Marcellus shale gas development in the northern part of West Virginia. And I think what that region has done to recover from some early issues is critical, and I think that's what Ohio has learned, quite frankly, already seeing, as I spoke to the governor earlier. I think Ohio came out of the chute very early and built a lot of these lessons learned into it. But when the shale gas development first started, and this is typical for where shale gas is drilled, there were a few winners, and there were a lot of what were perceived as losers. Because there were landowners who happened to have their mineral rights who were perceived as becoming millionaires, and there was everyone else around who saw their roads deteriorate, who saw an impact on the natural landscape, and at that time early on there was no clear path as to how that was going to be addressed. I think that state, Pennsylvania, through coalitions like the Marcellus Shale Coalition, have made tremendous leaps and bounds in closing that gap. But I think it's still a very real issue that must be appropriately and properly managed, and it's managed best through good, intelligent regulation, through being out clearly and understanding what you're going to do from a tax perspective and from a fee perspective, and how those are going to be used intelligently then to offset any kind of potential impact. And I think, and finally, certainly my belief is that the communities need to see long-term sustainable employment gains as a result of it. So it goes beyond the exploration and extraction. It must be what comes on the heels of that, from long-term employment that you can point to, that you can demonstrate, and that's going to have a long-term effect on that local economy.
Great. We have a few more minutes left in this panel. We're really talking about, a new opportunity here in Ohio. And I'd like to just ask each of you maybe to respond. In terms of, if you look back 5 years ago to the present, and then looking forward 5 years, how has the investment climate changed for your company in that time frame? And just, is it as exciting of an opportunity as we think it is? Is the governor going to be able to close out his first term, being able to point to significant investments because of this resource opportunity? And has it really changed in that shorter period of time? Ann?
Certainly for us it has. We've been investing in our infrastructure and upgrading that and working through that in any event. But this is a step change for us in terms of the opportunity to make both gathering type investments and the processing related investments that need to be made to carry this out. So I would say it's been a dramatic improvement for us in that regard.
I talked about the crude side of our business, and I do think that it offers a lot of value around diversity of feedstock supply. A lot has changed, though, in the last 5 years on the product side of our business, which would, with us becoming more efficient as an economy and having more higher CAFE standards for our vehicle fleet, more substitution, the reality is that our primary product, gasoline, which most refiners in the United States have been designed to be gasoline production machines, has probably peaked and will start declining, and the demand for that. And so refiners all across the nation, and here in Ohio as well, will have to really focus on what investments they make and how they're going to run their businesses around feedstock choices, but also how are they going to reposition for a shifting demand slate, as well as how do they become more efficient to be able to continue to compete moving forward.
Greg, you already said you're adding capacity at 2 Ohio plants. Is that different than 5 years ago? And what's the next 5, 10 years look
Yeah,
like?
I think it has improved, and I think it's improved significantly. I think this particular situation is extremely unique because I think normally you build an economy plant by plant, company by company. This is an economic foundation that, you know, you're talking tens of billions of dollars potentially, you're talking tens of thousands of jobs and whole industries being economically based off of it. And I think it comes along once in a lifetime, and it's arrived, and now it's ours to leverage or not.
Greg?
Well, we're part of a large global organization, and our philosophy is by and large to manufacture our products in the region where we sell them. So we don't import a lot of products from other parts of the world to support our market, nor do we export a lot of products to support the markets elsewhere. But we do grow with the regional market, region here being in the NAFTA region. So for us, we're watching very closely what evolves. It's my hope that we're going to see this manufacturing renaissance, that we're going to see a growth in the region that is going to drive us to expand our capacities, and certainly that's what ball we have our eye on right now.
Yeah, terrific. Well, just as I turn it over to Joe, I just also want to once again compliment the governor and his entire team. They have been very aggressive, certainly in talking to the chemical industry to try to ensure that we are maximizing our investment in the state of Ohio. And I have never seen a team from any state cabinet level that has been as coordinated and as active and aggressive in trying to recruit new investment to their state, and we want to compliment them for that.
Again, I have a question from the front row, and maybe to you, Cal, as well as the other panelists, because you've gotten off easy. Do you expect foreign direct investment in Ohio in the chemical sector, and what will drive this? This is not these folks, those folks from Germany, from parts of Europe, from parts of Asia. Will this attract them here? What will drive it here?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that, our membership base in the American Chemistry Council is, we are the U.S. association, but we have a lot of multinational companies, and Bayer is a good example, and as Craig said, any U.S. chemical company is also multinational in their base. But we also have members such as Reliance from India, who have made major investment in shale plays here in the United States, and they have a history of being vertically integrated in their operations. So we are anticipating that they are going to continue to invest in manufacturing capacity in the chemical sector. You can look at Braskem in Brazil that has made major purchases here in the United States, that is continuing to look for new investments. It is somewhat interesting when I'm talking to companies such as Reliance, Braskem, Tata from India. They are making the same assessment that I think Greg said, that the United States is the most stable investment opportunity in the world right now. And when you couple that with this new opportunity that shale gas provides us, it is a really attractive investment. So we are seeing that foreign capital investment looking very closely at the United States, which wasn't the case 5 years ago.
What about Ohio?
In Ohio, they are certainly looking there, and we're encouraging them to talk to the governor and his team.
Thank you. Thank you, Cal, and the panel. Thank you very much.